So here we are at the graveside of Frank J. Benson of the 17th Connecticut. How does he end up at the Spangler farm?
Frank Benson was not one of these young kids who just ran off to answer the call of duty.
Sure.
He was a mature man of about 30 years of age.
Wow.
And he was married to a woman named Jane, and they were living peacefully up in New York State when he decided to answer the call to action. He was one of the soldiers who enlisted in the summer of 1862, and he headed off to the front. His first year of service was fairly unexciting until on July 1st, 1863, he finds himself up on Barlow's Knoll.
Right.
And of course that's going to make his life a whole lot more complicated very quickly. Somewhere in the day's fighting, he got hit by some kind of projectile. The record is not clear whether it's a bullet or a piece of artillery shell. In the right thigh. It broke the bone just above the knee, the lower third of the right thigh.
And that's tricky.
And that's going to be tricky. We don't know how he managed to get from the site of his wounding down to the George Spangler farm, but we know that the doctors must have talked about his case a good bit because of something fairly unusual. Usually if you come in with a thigh wound, you immediately think about amputation.
Sure.
They decided not to amputate. And what they did was something that you would think about doing in case you fell out of this tree here and broke an arm or a leg. You'd put splints on it. Apparently that's what his doctors tried to do in this case. They didn't go to amputation. They decided to splint it.
Right, and I just quickly want to underscore that. I mean, Civil War medicine sometimes gets a bad rap, you know, chopping limbs off left and right, but that wasn't uncommon that amputation would sometimes be a last resort, especially the closer you get to the trunk of the body, the survival rates start to go down a little
Absolutely.
bit. And so there's one example of, you know, an attempt to
Of
save
deliberation.
a limb. Right, exactly.
I mean, if it was left up to an individual with all the patients stacking up behind you, probably the saw would be your first choice. In this case, they took the time to put splints on it, but it wasn't enough to save Private Benson's life. And he's going to die of his wounds about the middle of July. He'll be buried in the orchard down at the Spangler farm, and in time will be brought up here. In Private Benson's case, the story, of course, goes home with him. At home is his wife, Jane. And what became clear as she goes and prepares to apply for her own widow's pension in this case, is that her life has been complicated already in the fact that marrying Frank Benson was actually her second marriage. They had only been 24. Each of them had been 24 when they married back in 1856. They never had any kids. And now for the second time in her life, in July of 1863, she's finding herself a widow. A widow with no means of support.
Right.
So she began the process of applying for a widow's pension. But she apparently was looking out for herself long term, and she met a farmer who at this point was almost 20 years her senior, and she will give up her search for a pension because she will marry this neighboring farmer who's 20 years her senior, and they get married on Christmas Day, 1863.
Oh, wow.
Even
So
before
just a few
her
months
husband
later.
has been dead for 6 months, she has gone ahead and remarried.
Well, there you go. And,
When you
and
have
correct
to
me, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that in order to maintain the widow's pension, you couldn't remarry. Is that right?
That's it.
So,
And since she chose to remarry so quickly, her search for a pension pretty much terminates.
sure.
But I guess she had lived a hard enough life that she knows at this point that survival and security are very important to her. And she's been through so much already. She's been a widow once, she's been a widow twice. And now when she sees her opportunities, I guess she's going to take care of them.
I think
Security
so.
is important, and she had to define it her own way.
Right. Losing two husbands will, I'm sure, make you pretty cynical and
losing
intense.
one in July and gaining her next one in December really underscores that.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to go ahead and move to our next story here.
Okay.